In 2011, a Russian club called Anzhi Makhachkala, known by few outside their homeland, shot to fame after they were purchased by billionaire Suleyman Kerimov. They purchased a number of superstars, with the future looking bright for them, as they looked to take on the world, but soon their dreams fell apart, as the club died a slow and painful death. This is a story of the rise and fall of Anzhi Makhachkala. Anzhi Makhachkala were founded in 1991 and ascended to the Russian top flight for the first time in 1999. After an unremarkable number of years, it seemed as though their day had come in 2011. Suleyman Kerimov decided to purchase the club that year. He had amassed a fortune worth tens of billions through being a stakeholder in companies such as gas company Gazprom, fertilizer producers Uralkali, and Russian finance company Sberbank. At the time, he was the 36th richest man in the world. He was more than willing to get the checkbook out and lead the club into a new era. He planned to spend over 200 million to improve the infrastructure of the club, which included building a new 40,000-seater stadium. Makhachkala, at the time, had a population of only around 500,000, and the Dagestan area the city is in was seeing constant clashes between the authorities and rebels. Kerimov hoped the growth of the club would benefit the city and change it for the better. He got to work bringing in the players, with World Cup winner Roberto Carlos joining the club, along with fellow Brazilian Eto'o for 10 million. And in the summer, more arrivals followed. Hungarian winger Balázs Dusták was signed for 14 million, along with Yuri Zhirkov. But the club's marquee signing came in the form of Cameroonian striker Samuel Eto'o. The forward was signed from Inter Milan for €21 million, becoming the highest paid player in the world on a yearly salary of around 20 million. The plans seem to be starting to take shape. The first season following the takeover was promising, as the club finished 5th in the league, with Gus Hiddink being appointed as manager midway through. Further signings arrived in the form of Lassana Diarra and Christopher Samba. They would open a local academy with the aim of developing young talent. However, the players are rather disengaged with the city, as due to the political instability of the Dagestan region, the players lived and trained in Moscow, only making the 1,200-mile trip to Makhachkala on match days via plane. However, the next season saw further promise, with Brazilian winger Willian joining for €35 million. They finished third, reaching the last 16 of the Europa League, and were defeated in the Russian Cup final by CSKA Moscow. The future seemed bright, but the dreams would soon crash and burn. In the summer of 2013, the fertilizer producers Uralkali that Kerimov had invested in saw their value drop by 5 billion. As a result, the club had to adopt a more frugal approach, which proved tricky given how much of a departure it was from their previous lavish spending. Gus Hiddink resigned in the summer of 2013, and the club soon fell apart. Players were thrown out of the door one by one, as Anzhi desperately looked to slash their budget by any means necessary. Yuri Zhirkov, Alexander Kokorin, and Igor Denisov were all sold at once in a package deal, with the latter two having only recently signed for the club. Eto'o and Willian also left for Chelsea that same window, as the squad was decimated. This necessity saw Kerimov lose interest in the project, as further issues occurred, with Rene Meulensteen being sacked as manager after only 16 days. The 13-14 season was a catastrophe for Anzhi, as they finished last in the Russian Premier League, winning only 3 games. In spite of this though, they would make an immediate return to the top flight. They would narrowly avoid relegation, and Kerimov's dream came to an end once and for all when he sold the club to Osman Kadyrov. The club were relegated again in 2018, but were saved when FC Amkar Perm had their licence for the next season withdrawn, and so Anzhi would live to fight another day. There was no saving them the next season though, as they were relegated beyond any doubt in the 18-19 season. It was announced that for the 1920 campaign, the club had failed to get their Russian football licence after failing to meet the minimum requirements. They were forced to play in the 3rd tier as their finances continued to wane, and the squad would consist of mostly youth players. Anzhi Makhachkala were denied a licence to play in the league by the footballing authorities, and after an appeal was rejected, they lost their professional status. The club would play their final ever game, which they won by 4-0, and they told their fans that they hoped to one day return. After 21 years of existence, Anzhi Makhachkala ceased to exist in 2022. Anzhi's story was one full of promise that ultimately failed to deliver. Akin to Brooks Marsden's adventure with Gretna, it shows what happens when a club is too dependent on one individual's finances, and how a lack of patience can ultimately spell their doom. Anzhi could well have gone on to become one of Russia's greatest teams, but they ended up running before they could walk, and their dreams died at a young age. If there's one thing to take away from Kerimov's lavish spending with Anzhi Makhachkala, it is that the higher they rise, the harder they fall.